Okay, so we're back in the Provo area, and we are at, in the background is the Slope School. The Slope School is affiliated with a business model called Acton Academies, and it's a new type of private school model that's called micro schools. And this is something that was growing in popularity originally with like the alt school model, but originally, especially in the last couple years with all of the lockdowns and families being dissatisfied with how local school districts were managing the educational process, there's been a lot of growth in these micro school models. So this particular micro school is affiliated with the Acton Institute, and it was founded by Jeff Sandifer. In Austin, Jeff Sandifer and his wife Laura created Acton Academy as a low-cost private school model. And it's a franchise, so they're growing leaps and bounds. They're also internationally, they sort of encourage parents to start up their own schools. It's very much sort of a startup, lean model that implies a lot of online blended learning with ostensibly progressive individualized education. And that's what's attractive to a lot of people, is the idea that you're going to have a personalized education, and their motto is sort of the hero's journey. So they have Socratic seminar, but then they also do a lot of gamified online learning systems, and then a lot of instruction around social emotional learning as well. And so that's something that parents are increasingly concerned about. And I would say maybe not always for the right reasons, because I know that measured behavior change is going to be a social impact investment market. And actually all of these kinds of schools, education being United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, are connected to human capital investment. And ultimately these low-cost private schools, they're not going to be breaking even on their tuition, which is like $8,000 to $10,000 a year. So there's a good chance in my book that there's going to be a connection at some point to social impact bonds or pay for performance bonds linked to blockchain education vouchers. And at that point, the standardization of the curriculum is going to start to come into play. So for now, these low-cost independent private schools that are franchised often as competency-based education schools are sort of out of the realm of the standardized education model, but more and more I think as the shift is going to come in school choice to digital vouchers, they will be looped in. Now this is a high-growth franchise, and Jeff Sandifer is actually, his background and fortune was built on energy trading. So he was a Texas oil guy, and then he was also a business professor at UT Austin, and I think ran afoul of some of the other business faculty and then spun off and set up his own competency-based intensive business school. So he's definitely allied with sort of free market capitalism. He's part of the Mont Pelerin Society. Very much, that is informed by the Chicago School, which is fully in alignment with sort of this neoliberal social impact finance, but based on sort of bootstrap capitalism fully. And so, I think there are things coming up with the social emotional learning and how that might fit into social credit scoring badges. And, his response was that, he's a capitalist, so he doesn't do that Chinese totalitarian thing. But ultimately, the social emotional learning and the blended learning are going to be folded into these social impact bonds, which are pure hyper-capitalism. And so, I wanted to come out here because it turns out the founder of this school, the Slope School, and we're surrounded. This area is very close in proximity to a lot of the tech sector. It's an affluent area, a lot of people with jobs in the tech sector. And the founder of this school actually was the chief operating officer for the Acton Academy. Jeff and Laura recruited him from Goldman Sachs. So he had been at Goldman Sachs almost 2 years. Prior to that, he had been working with the Christensen Institute. And this is Clayton Christensen, who is a professor. He's now passed, but he was a well-known business professor at Harvard, and his focus was on disruptive innovation. That was we were going to disrupt everything. And initially, the focus of his institute, which later became the InnoSight Institute, was on disrupting education and disrupting healthcare. When I first started doing my research, I was much more familiar with the education space, but clearly we can now see that healthcare, where the healthcare disruption is going in terms of telemedicine and biosurveillance and apps and wellness apps and all of that. So, I would say this is important to consider at this moment, as a lot of people's a lot of families are becoming dissatisfied with the public education system and looking for alternatives. Oftentimes this is, break the system to offer the solution you wanted anyway. And the shift is towards competency-based education, flex model education, which will be supported by these blockchain vouchers and digital identity. And so where does the micro school model fit into this? Where does the Acton Academy model fit into this? It's very much a high growth franchise. And I think it's quite interesting that, again, the founder of this school and the former chief operating officer for the entire organization was coming straight out of Goldman Sachs and out of Harvard Business School. So there is this wedding of blended learning, managed social emotional gamification of education, but it's framed as a hero. Your child is a hero. They are uplifted. They are cared for personally. Although this personalization, as we find out, and I'll talk about this later a little bit more, the personalized learning model through technology is actually the machine developing a cognitive model of how your mind works or how your child's mind works. It is mirroring their mind so that they can offer up assistance and gentle nudges. But then the question is, how is this program developed to optimize your child? Where in the pecking order is it designed to optimize? Because certainly, while we pretend that we live in a meritocracy, there are various social levels, right? There are people who are supposed to stay at the bottom and people who are supposed to stay at the top. And then where does personalized learning and AI management of children come into play? And then how much agency do you have in this, what is probably, a very nice school. It probably looks, it's modern, it's probably very clean. I came out of a school district that most of the schools were falling down with lead in the water and asbestos. And so in that respect, maybe these schools don't mask. I'm not sure exactly for this particular school, but a lot of the micro schools have other, more flexibility. So that's why parents seek them out. But they're not understanding the role of the micro school with the digital vouchers in the overall model. And I think it's very important for us to understand futures trading, understand the background of this particular franchise comes from someone who is in business and prior to in the business of energy futures trading, because that's going to be what human capital is. It's going to be the next version of the human capital futures is the next version of bioenergy, and that's what we were talking about out on Battle Creek. So it might look really nice, it might have a really nice package, it might be branded really nicely, but we have to look at the overall picture and know that the economy that is being built by the tech sector in Silicon Valley, in the greater Boston area, here along the Wasatch Range, is very much about a dehumanized version of life where you're projecting your consciousness into robots or into online telepresence work. It's not grounded in place and it's not grounded in real relationships. So just a lot to think about. And because Acton Academy is one of these largest chains and there is such an interest right now in finding alternate options to the public system, we have to know that ultimately there are many paths, but they're all going to the same place, which is AI and education. And that's why I strongly feel that as parents and caring elders and community members, we need to really think very long and hard what it means to run an education system across all levels that is being managed by AI for potentially impact investing and telepresence labor.
Are these schools, is this just like part in person, part online, or how does the slope model work?
I know that there's a good amount of blended learning. I think that for the most part, I can't speak specifically to the Acton Academy. The low-cost private school model was developed by Bill Gates at Lakeview, I think, in Seattle. That was his school, his children's school, and the headmaster there had been there for 20 years. And so they have been doing research for the past decade in how to bring down the costs of private schools. And they were doing that by having inexpensive facilities, having including a lot of technology to lower their human resource costs, to almost eliminate administration, to have teachers cross across a number of different schools, and then to have flex models which do involve some homeschooling, some offsite schooling, some work-based schooling. So I'm not 100% sure how this school works in that way, but the overall micro school model is lean, low cost, as few investments in infrastructure and human capital as possible. And it's sort of like the, WeWork of the education system. And actually I think WeWork for a while did have a school model, but they're experimenting in all these different ways. And again, I'm not saying that it might not feel like a good fit for some families, but we have to understand that once it starts to go with competency, with badges, with micro-credentials and all of these sorts of measurements, that is going to fit into the AI gig economy. And that's where it's all going in the future.